everybody. Want to talk just a little bit about this idea of voice. Now, some of us in the early weeks have commented on how this is one of the things we really want to strengthen through this type of class is our voice. Voice is one of those weird, intangible things. Like, we all know it when we hear it, but we don't necessarily know what it is or why it's so important, but we know it's important. Voice is essentially how you sound when you're doing your storytelling. It is infused in everything we do, from our word choices to how we develop our characters, to how we describe our plots, what we include, what we don't, the language that we use, how we manipulate dialogue. It's how, when you open up a book, how it sounds in your head. And I know because I've been in your chair when I went through this program. As a new writer, this idea is really intimidating, that we need to have a right or correct voice. And I want you guys to kind of get away from that mentality if you are. Your voice will come naturally as you continue to write. It's one of those byproducts of writing every day when we can. And as we've talked in the discussion forum, sometimes it's easier said than done, to write every day. But by writing and practicing, essentially, is what you're doing when you're writing every day, you start to naturally develop your voice. Now, before we go on, I want to talk a little bit about how I developed my voice. But before we do that, I want to give you a couple examples of what voice can do. We've hopefully all read Hemingway, and we can always tell when we read a Hemingway piece that it's a Hemingway piece because of the way, primarily, he uses dialogue and sparse description. You open up any Hemingway book and you can tell immediately from the way it sounds that it's Hemingway. The same is true for this guy, H.P. Lovecraft. He established his voice by using dark imagery, nearly incomprehensible names. Cthulhu is the only one that I have ever learned how to spell. And masterful depictions of the dank and the scary and the fear. Another good example of this kind of voice is Edgar Allan Poe. You open up a Poe short story, and we have one in the announcements this week, you know that it's Poe because of the flourished language that he uses, the suspense that he uses in all of his stories, the kind of sense of maudlin apprehension. Then we have, forgive the language, this book here, Go the F to Sleep. This is a little bit different because it's a kid's story that's written for adults, so it's really not a kid's story, it's an adult story, but the language and the drawings, which are all part of the reading experience, are childlike, but the expletive language, the powerful language, is clearly non-childlike. And the voice in this is a unique blend between lighthearted childishness and that tired, sarcastic fatigue that parents suffer through. So this voice is way different than maybe one of its contemporaries like Goodnight Moon. And then we all know I love trashy romance novels. We've got this one here, Stephanie Lawrence. And then in this book, and in many books like it, the voice is always like shapely fiction, rich details, rich descriptions, a lot of focus on the physical aspects, and kind of a warm female voice. That's not true for all of them, but that's kind of like you're hearing the heroine's story usually, or at least her perspective. So voice can be used many different ways, and it's a huge variety all across the board of all types of writing, fiction and nonfiction. And it's going to come naturally. I don't want you to overthink it. Stephen King did not sound like Stephen King when he first started writing, and in fact, I don't have his book with me right here, but in his book on writing, he talks about how his first couple stories sounded like those authors that he adored. And that's going to be the way it is as you start your writing. Your voice will develop and mature as you develop and mature as a writer, and it will always be singularly you. It's how you use your words, your descriptions, that tone that you're trying to build. Your voice is an inherent part of your writing. Try not to force it. Try not to focus and like, oh, my voice is just crap in this story. Because A, sometimes we're too close and we don't really get a full sense of what that voice is. That's another benefit of workshopping classes and working with an editor. They really get you to kind of see how other people hear your stories. My voice is still a work in progress. You know, I've been published a couple times. I teach writing, and it's still, the story that I write tomorrow will sound a little bit different than the story I wrote yesterday, but I have a clear sense of style now when I write. I write two different types of fiction. Well, three different types of fiction. I write a lot of microfiction. Those are 50 words or less. I write a lot of short stories, and then I also write trashy historical novels. Now, the stories that are trashy and historical, they have a little bit of a different tone than my short story fiction. All of my short story fictions are set in this bar. It's called the Broken Violin. It's kind of like a dive in everywhere America, any smallish city kind of dive bar. And then my microfiction is usually about death or abandonment. So my voice is still me as we go through those stories, but they're tweaked a little bit. That's one of the cool things about voice, is you can change it by changing your language, changing your description, changing how you do your dialogue to fit the genre or approach to literary fiction that you're working with. You write a trashy romance novel and then you write a dime store detective novel, we're still going to be able to tell that it's you writing this, but you can change the voice to kind of develop the atmosphere a little bit differently. As for my personal journey to get to this point with being comfortable with my voice, it was a disastrous work in progress. I have two examples of the same story that's going to be coming up in our midweek announcement that kind of shows how my voice changed, even just within the scope of one story. I wrote it in second person and then in third person limited. And even with that, you can kind of see how the voice develops as you change these aspects. When I first started writing, I wanted to write exactly like Diana Gabaldon. She was, and still is, my all-time favorite writer. And so my writing was full of what I thought was amazing and very specific descriptions. And by focusing on those descriptions, my dialogue was kind of suffering. And it's just like we all are with our first drafts, a little embarrassing. And so I set my romance novel writing aside when I started taking these classes for this program that many of you are in, and I started focusing on short stories, and that's where I really became comfortable with my voice. That's one of the super benefits of writing a short story, is you're not committed for more than 8 to 20 pages of creating that same exact environment like you would be in a novel. You're allowed to make those mistakes. You also have to pay attention to every word, and by doing that we really strengthen our characterization, our dialogue, and the development of our voice. As I started working with my professors and my fellow peers in our workshopping classes, I began to kind of back off on my description heavy stuff. Now if you read my stuff, there's still a lot of description because it's what I like to read, and what you like to read is going to influence your voice too. But now every description, everything is a little bit of this fatalistic perspective. Like, kind of think of like a 1950s dime store noir kind of novel. That colors all of my short stories because that's the world that I've created. And it has, by describing the diviness of the bar, the types of people that go to that bar, I've naturally started incorporating that kind of feeling in my voice, and that has kind of spread through much of my other writing, except of course for my happy, sappy romance novels, which even in my heroes in those books, they are kind of that fatalistic hero that you would see, you know, going and drinking away his worries in a dive bar in the middle of the city somewhere. Voice is something that you need to be aware of but not actively worry about. It's not anything that you can, like with our characters, we do the interview process, right? It's not something that you can do with your voice. My best suggestion as both a teacher and a student of writing, as well as a published author, is just keep at it. Be aware of how you're presenting your characters. Be aware of the language that you're using, both in your dialogue and your descriptions, and you're going to start to see that voice coming through, and your readers are going to hear you in that voice and start associating all of your pieces with it. So, long story short, This is a huge work in progress. It's nothing that's going to just snap. There you go. That's your voice. It's a work in progress. Keep building your catalog. Keep building your collection of writing, and you'll see your voice project and progress through your writing career. You can actively develop and strengthen it by paying attention to those details, those character developments, the setting, how you describe, what you choose to tell and what you choose to show. And then, of course, as with everything else that we do as a writer, read, and read voraciously. Read everything that's kind of in the kind of voice and tone that you want, and then you're going to start absorbing and reflecting that in your writing too. So don't overthink voice. It comes naturally. It's a work in progress, and that's one of the things that you and I can talk about. We can post on the general discussion forum, you know, strategies on how to strengthen a specific angle of your voice and all that good stuff. But it's a journey. Don't expect your voice to come shining through with that first draft, because remember, that first draft is never what we want it to be, and through revisions is another way that we really kind of strengthen, through our word choice, character development, all of that, how our voice is coming across to our audience. So voice is amazing. It's a little bit natural. It's not going to happen overnight. Work in progress. Don't stress out too much about it. In the end, it's going to be awesome. If you have any questions, hit me up. Let's talk on the general discussions forum. You guys got this. Don't overthink it.